Hello, I'm Jack Pascoe, the Conservation Research Manager for the Conservation Ecology Centre. Thank you for having me today to talk about our pig control program in the Otways. I'm coming to you today from Apollo Bay in Gadigal country, one of the 5 language groups of the Maar Nation. The vast majority of the works of this program has been undertaken on Gadigal country, but also some is on the bordering Maar Nations in Kirrarung and Coolidgin country. The program is funded through the Wild Otways Initiative by the Australian government and led by the Conservation Ecology Centre, which I work for. It's a feral pig and deer management program, but we're going to focus specifically on pigs because that's the topic of today. And yeah, I'd like to thank the Australian government for their support for this project. Apologies for not being live with you today. I'll be travelling next week, but hopefully I'll be able to tune in to answer some questions at the end of the program, at the end of the presentation. So I know I'm singing to the choir here when we talk about feral pig impacts, so I will keep it very brief. But as much as anything, opportunity to share some images of some of the damage that we've recorded. Feral pigs obviously do damage to native vegetation and sensitive habitats, particularly aquatic types of habitats and riparian zones. They spread weeds and pathogens, and they're a vector for disease and parasites, things like Cryptosporidium. And I guess there's concern if there were an outbreak of foot and mouth issues with that as well. They tend to foul waterways through their rooting and erosion type damages. And in the Otways, where we have very little of that type of thing within our national parks, it's a real concern this might become an issue. And they compete with native livestock and animals, native animals and livestock, and we see extensive damage to pasture and crops, which is probably what's got us more engagement than anything else, which won't surprise anyone. So what we consider this project to be in really 3 pillars. So the first and foremost is community engagement and education. I won't speak a lot about this today because it's really basic what we're doing, but it's been incredibly important to the success of the program. So we've had a range of information workshops, talking to landowners and land managers about techniques for both monitoring and control of feral pigs, the potential impacts and areas that we think that these stakeholders need to be concerned and focused on, and also demonstrations of the types of equipment that we use. We found the best bang for buck has been in a small engagement with local landowners and over the fence sort of conversations. So that's really been the wins. Investing in sort of champion type landowners across the place that become concerned for whatever reason and then are strongly focused on action. So where we've built them up and had success with working with them on their properties, they've been really the gateway drug into the community effectively. We've advocated really strongly for the use of the feral scan platform for its ease of use, so land managers and landowners can begin to log records of both feral pigs, feral deer, etc., so that the program manager ourselves are on top of any sort of identifications of these species outside of where we think they are, so we're able to act with haste. So we've had pretty good uptake of this platform, and it's helped us to be quite reactive. The second pillar of the program is around intelligence, so monitoring and surveillance, and we separate those into 2 things. The monitoring, we consider it to be sort of long-term I guess surveillance or not long-term monitoring of a population against a baseline, whereas surveillance is more ad hoc. We might get a report of a feral pig and then we start to use infrared cameras, for instance, to try and verify that they're in the area and that they're still in the area for control. We've used a range of things: GPS tracking collars, camera grids, eDNA waterway sampling and aerial monitoring surveys. We'll talk about each of them briefly after this. And we've used a range of different control methods, including, I guess, being reactive to new detections. Largely, we've used remotely triggered cage traps. We've used some baiting, and with feral deer, we've used field game harvesters, but we're not going to talk about that much today. As I mentioned, feral scan has been the thing by which we've really advocated to get as many data points in from the community and relevant stakeholders. It's been working really well. It's really simple to use. It's an application that can be on your phone. So we found that because it's easy, readily available, and simple to use, that's been the platform that we're really advocating for. Some of the government agencies involved have been resistant, having their own platforms, but we've sort of won them around, just saying, look, this is really user-friendly, and we think we need to have up-to-date information, or this will fail, this venture. I really probably should start with feral pigs have sort of been on the radar for my organisation for about half a decade. Pigs in the Otways, there's been a well-known population around the West Barwon Dam for decades. It's largely been contained within this sort of population around the dam. More and more over the last half a decade, we've been seeing pigs outside of the known areas. Stakeholders like or land managers like the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning and Parks Victoria have been returning more and more positive IDs of these animals, and so it was becoming more of a concern. So when there was an opportunity to fund the program, we were really keen to lead it and take it on, because we were really concerned about feral pigs establishing the Otways and becoming a real force for evil, effectively. So I wanted to talk really briefly about what we've done in terms of monitoring. As I said, we've used camera grids. I'll talk about that. Aerial surveys. We've used direct on-ground observance of both presence and absence, things like scats and tracks, really. Sampling of water, vegetation monitoring. We're starting to establish. We're having a little bit of trouble with pigs because they're not ubiquitous across the landscape, establishing impact assessments because they're so transient and move around. If we were to measure the impact in one area in 1 year and come back to it, it may say that we've done the damage and there's no more pigs and there's no more impact, but in fact it just moves down the stream. So we're still working on ways of measuring impact. We're also advocating for the analysis of genetic structure, because they are going to help us understand a little bit how animals move across the landscape. And I'll try and talk to each of these as we go through. So firstly, this is some of the sort of obvious impact that you can start to use. These are, a number of animals across pastures that are doing extraordinary damage. And you can see really why farmers in particular are concerned. They're losing money because of these types of damages. And they're quite widespread, and this happens incredibly quickly at a time of year when the pigs come out of the forest to get cockchafers out of the pasture. Real concern for landowners. Something needs to be done to address it. So that's sort of more of the ad hoc stuff that draws us into an area and we might begin surveillance. These monitoring grids that we've established around the West Barwon area, and we've replicated this across a number of landscapes, is a camera grid designed to effectively measure density. So the cameras are spaced around 500 metres apart, there and thereabouts, and based on known home range sizes of our animals, which we'll talk about a little bit in a second. And we're deploying around 60 to 70 cameras in each landscape, and we're deploying them for a few months. Basically, what these camera grids are doing, we're then bringing them back in. This is some pretty rough country to move through, by the way, so it's taken a bit of grunt work. But we're identifying individual pigs using some fancy mathematics, which I'm sure as hell not going to go into with you. But we're able to get a reasonably accurate measure of density. And so there's a baseline by which we can measure change. We'll talk a bit about the results of this as we go through. We're doing some interesting stuff with them too. This is simply a measure of occupancy, taking into account naive occupancy and detectability, and then measuring it from the distance to clear land. And you can see the occupancy of pigs drops right away the further you move from cleared land. And that's an indication that, yes, pigs are living in the forest, but boy, are they happier where they have access to pasture as well. This is an example of two pigs where we're using GPS data loggers on collars to track the movements. Now, this is a really well-known area around the West Barwon Dam in the bottom left of the picture. So I'm not concerned about giving locations. We do have quite a lot of illegal activity around pigs in the Otway, so we don't like to give away too much about where we know they are. But this is one we're relatively safe because everyone knows about it. The boar is the darker red fixes, and you can see he is focusing around the dam down in the southwest of our study area, or in this particular study area. But he's doing these massive extraterrestrial movements up into the northeast of this area. And he's doing this semi-regularly. That's around 30 kilometres there and then 30 kilometres back. And he's doing that to visit different groups of sows. So you can see one of the sows is the lighter pink around the dam. She stays put, as do most of the sows in our study. Almost all of the ones that we've collared have stayed really localised with small home ranges. But what the boar has done is he's moved across the interface with the forest and open land, and he's interacted there with a number of groups of sows. And because of that information, we found these populations of sows and pigs that we didn't know about on the interface. And because of that, he's given them away and we've been able to control them. So we're really using this sort of active research as a way to target our control efforts. It's been incredibly effective. We've also dabbled with infrared aerial monitoring surveys from a fixed-wing aircraft. We designed this, and you can see the parameters on the left. I won't go into it, but basically we've designed it to comprehensively take in a specific study area. And in this case, it was designed to overlap with the same camera grid. And we were hoping to be able to compare densities and understand which of the methods was going to be most cost effective. It's quite an expensive exercise. We're hoping to get really useful data from it. So as you'll see here from this is an image of pigs using the infrared on the left. To the right is sort of real footage. And let's play it. Hopefully she works. And you can see here that really easy to spot in the infrared, really difficult to spot in the naked eye. So it's working quite well. What we did find, though, is that this works really well where the canopy was lighter. And also in this specific instance, the operator of the infrared camera has taken it on himself or themselves to zoom in on the animals after they detected the hotspot. We hadn't asked them to do this across the entire landscape on advice that we'd received from others. Had we would do it, this is how we would survey the landscape. We wouldn't be so focused on getting swath, perfect swath coverage and getting the entire landscape. We'd really focus in on individual animals to make the identification process simpler. Because in this instance, that was the best record we got. The rest were sort of orange blotches, and it's really difficult to identify pigs. Probably wouldn't invest in this in the future unless we were going to do more of an active search before a control operation. It is great data if you get the right data because it's geo-referenced, you know where animals are. But unlike our GPS tracking collars and our infrared cameras, we're not able to identify individuals. So for long-term monitoring, it has its drawbacks. We also invested in eDNA waterway sampling. We didn't have success with this in terms of identifying new pigs. And again, we think there's probably better methods of going to known pig populations and working out from there, whether that's using GPS tracking collars to give away meta populations or however else that might work. But certainly eDNA water sampling wasn't effective in our instance. Maybe it would be where the densities were higher. Okay. But what we really wanted to talk to you about is we're building up this really interesting picture of detailed information at each site. So here you've got the results of the camera grid overlaid with the hotspots for the GPS tracking collars for 2 animals in the West Barwon Dam, and you can see it overlaps. So we're able to be really confident that not only are the methods working, they're coinciding with similar results. So we can target our control effort to areas where we're getting high activity in both collars and cameras. The other thing is you build up a library of individual photos, which is wonderful. What that means is not only it's great for density estimates, but it also means that we're able to identify all the individuals in a population and know when we've removed them all. Control options we've talked about. We've used quite a number of different methods across it. We were expecting that we'd use probably more ground shooting and hog-on baiting. We found that ground shooting is really just a mop-up operation if you've got a very trap-shy individual or one that you've missed in a trapping process. Hog-on, we sort of expected to be the low input, pretty straightforward methodology where we'd put it out, the pigs would come, we'd get some of the population. But we found there was quite a lot of investment in getting animals comfortable enough, eating enough of the non-poisonous bait that you were comfortable that when they came in with a lethal dose, that they'd get a lethal dose. We found that that was quite a lot of input. And And so we really have found that the absolute best bang for our buck is remotely activated cage traps. We're getting most mobs and most individuals within a mob comfortable. It might take a while to establish the fee feeding and getting hooked on the bait that we're using, but that is by far and large the way we've removed the most pigs. We haven't had an opportunity to do aerial shooting. We probably don't need to. Very challenging in the Otways where we've got very heavy timber, and we haven't trialled exclusion fencing. We really haven't felt like we've needed to move away from these remotely triggered cage traps. And we've just got a little bit of footage here. You can see when the animals are getting used to the traps, they can be quite flighty. You see a bat flies across and scares the animal away. That's pretty common early on. And here's another bit of footage, and it really does show this is a mob that have become habituated to going in the trap. They know there's feed in there, so they're pretty keen to get at it. They move in. The beauty of these cameras is you get a ping on your phone, then you can hit play, and you can be watching this footage from the comfort of your bedroom or your bed in the middle of the night, and you go and just wait for every last pig to be in the cage, and then remotely activate it and bang, go and deal with it in the morning, basically. So we're finding this is the absolute most effective bang for buck that we get. Just wanted to draw on a couple of case studies that we've had. This is a property that we started working on about 18 months ago. I'm not going to talk about where it is because of issues with illegal pig release and illegal hunting activities. No one wants that on their property. So this landowner had 22 of 27 paddocks damaged by feral pigs, and estimated damage over a year of around $50,000 to $150,000 to refurbish these paddocks at approximately $1,250 a hectare. That's a significant cost for a landowner who's trying to make a living off their property. On our initial camera grid, we detected 45 individual pigs. On the same property, we then dispatched 77 pigs. So we did miss some in our initial monitoring. And we did have to ground shoot a couple of individuals, but most of them were captured in 9 remotely triggered trapping operations. We also removed 84 feral pigs within 5 kilometres of this property, so it's a real hotspot area, and another 42 within 10 kilometres. So this was a real hotspot of pig activity across this property. In this year, we've put out our camera grid again, the exact same camera grid. We found a single boar across the entire transect, one transient boar, so a non-breeding population within the vicinity of this landowner's property. Little to no pasture damage. So now we're in a position where we can continue to monitor this site. We really know what the baseline is, and we know what level of investment has given us. Another one, we've talked a little bit about this, is the West Barwon program. We've had a couple of pigs fitted with GPS collars, 11,000 position fixes more now. We've also fitted another boar since with a collar. We know a lot about this land, about this population. We've had camera grids of 62 cameras, as I was saying, deployed for a few months, 365 images of feral pigs. We've talked about aerial monitoring. We've talked about eDNA. We also had these reactive sort of surveillance sites to make sure we know the best up-to-date information about where the pigs are. We've controlled 26 feral pigs across 5 trap sessions to date. And we've just deployed again. And this is in partnership very closely with the land manager, Parks Victoria, and Barwon Water, who manage the dam. The interesting thing with this is we've just deployed the second year of the monitoring cameras, and basically what we're finding is very little pig damage. So we haven't retrieved the cameras and gotten the results for how many individuals in the landscape or a density estimate, but we're really confident that we've knocked that population around again. And that's been consistent every second year when we brought in our data. We're having a real impact on these pigs, and in places we thought in heavy forest that we would struggle. So we think it's good. We think this early detection and surveillance and good communication with the community, really high level of investment in information. So good monitoring, good research of the GPS data collars, is how we're being able to be effective when we come to setting our traps, free feeding, etc., etc. That's how it's working for us in the forest of the Otways. So thank you very much. I'm not sure where I'll be come Friday, but hopefully I can answer some questions afterwards. Otherwise, thank you for having me, and yeah, hopefully we can answer some questions. Cheers. Bye.